Adventures of Ellen White and the Pioneers. A very different day.
Near the little town of Washington, New Hampshire, some farmers had built a little church and a school out in the woods. They had heard the message that Jesus was coming soon, and so they had built the church where they could study together and also be a light for others to come and learn with them. The great burden of their hearts was to help everyone learn that Jesus was coming soon. But having a nice church was not enough. Now they needed a good teacher for their school. So a young woman by the name of Delight Oakes was asked to be the teacher. Her mother, Mrs. Rachel Preston, also came to live with her. This teacher and her mother were different from the other Adventists because they kept Saturday, the seventh day, for the Sabbath, instead of keeping Sunday, as the Adventists did at the time. They were Seventh-day Baptists, and although there was no one else in the village to meet with them on Saturday, Delight and her mother were faithful in keeping the seventh day holy. Of course, the Adventists wanted to get better acquainted with their new school teacher and her mother, so they began to talk to them about the Bible and the second coming of Jesus. He is coming soon, they said, and we are preparing to meet him. And they read many verses to them from the Bible to prove that Jesus was coming soon. Rachel Preston and her daughter loved the Bible and were very glad to study with the Adventists. But after they had finished reading the verses about the coming of Jesus, Mrs. Preston said, "Now I would like to ask you a question. Why don't you keep the Sabbath of the Lord? Why do you worship him on Sunday?" "Why do you ask that?" someone asked. "Isn't Sunday the Sabbath of the Lord?" "Indeed it's not," answered Mrs. Preston. And then she opened the Bible and read many verses to them about the seventh-day Sabbath. She was ready to give them an answer, just as the Bible tells us we should be able to do. Let's read this important verse and remember where it's found in the Bible. 1 Peter 3 verse 15 says, "Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you." And that's just what Rachel Preston did. She gave the Adventists an answer to their question, "Isn't Sunday the Sabbath of the Lord?" This is a very important verse for us to know, so that we will be ready to tell others just what we believe if someone should ask. Mrs. Preston was so sure that God wanted his people to keep the seventh day holy that she could not believe that Jesus was coming to take the righteous to heaven until they were keeping all the commandments, including the fourth commandment about the seventh day Sabbath. When the big disappointment came in 1844 and Jesus did not come, some of the farmers began to think more about the Sabbath. They found more verses that said the seventh day is the Sabbath, and they could not find any verses that said the Sabbath had been changed to Sunday, which is the first day of the week. So the Holy Spirit was really working on the hearts of many people to consider this topic. Finally, one Sunday morning, a farmer by the name of William Farnsworth stood up in the little church and said, "Brethren, I am convinced that the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord." There was silence in the little church. Many of the other people sat with their heads bowed, as if they were thinking seriously about making the very same decision. Mr. Farnsworth continued speaking, "And from now on, I am going to keep the Sabbath." And after a few moments of silence, someone else stood up and said, "I too want to obey the Lord's command." Others also decided that very day to keep the seventh day holy according to the commandment. The very next Sabbath, Mrs. Preston and her daughter met in a home with several of these families to worship God on the seventh day. The following day, which was Sunday, William Farnsworth and his son worked by the side of the road in order that their friends and neighbours who were going to the little church could see that they did not believe Sunday was the right day to keep holy anymore. Week after week and month after month, more people joined with the group who worshipped on the seventh-day Sabbath, until nearly all the members of the little church were keeping the seventh day holy as the Lord's day. And finally, a preacher by the name of Frederick Wheeler joined with them also. He became their minister, and then they held their meetings in the little church on the seventh day. So this church in Washington, New Hampshire, became our very first Seventh-day Adventist church. This whole group became Sabbath keepers because Delight and her mother, Mrs. Rachel Preston, were ready to give an answer from the Bible that the seventh day was still the Sabbath of God. Just think of the courage it took for William Farnsworth to stand up in that little church and be the first one to say that he was going to keep the seventh day for the Sabbath. We also will have to be brave like that in these last days. Do you know why? We find the answer in Matthew 10, verses 18 to 20. And ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony. And that is the only way some people are going to learn about the Sabbath and the other truths that we believe. Now let's look at verses 32 and 33. Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. William Farnsworth was not ashamed to get up and confess that he believed the seventh day was the correct Sabbath. We are living in serious times when people are asking questions to find a hope in this old world of trouble and sorrow. And that is why we need to remember that verse in 1 Peter 3, verse 15. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you. One day, Captain Bates heard about this group of Adventists in Washington, New Hampshire, who had started keeping the seventh day for the Sabbath. Captain Bates was always interested in any new light on the Bible, so he decided to go and visit these people and study with them to see if they were right and correct about the seventh day Sabbath. It was 10 o'clock at night when he finally found Elder Wheeler's home. Captain Bates was so anxious to know why these people were keeping the seventh day instead of Sunday that he did not want to go to sleep, even though it was very late. And so the two men prayed, opened their Bibles, and began a wonderful study about God's Sabbath day. Elder Wheeler turned to Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Captain Bates could see that God was very definite about a certain day, because he mentioned the seventh day 3 times in just 2 verses. When Captain Bates turned to Exodus 20, verse 8, the very first word he saw was remember. Yes, God put the word remember right at the beginning of the 4th commandment, so that we would always remember and not forget to keep the seventh day holy. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Captain Bates knew that Jesus was our example, and that we should do as he had done. We read in Luke 4 verse 16 that Jesus kept the Sabbath. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. On and on through the night, Captain Bates and Elder Wheeler studied about the Sabbath until the sun came up the very next morning. Captain Bates also visited the Farnsworth and Mrs. Rachel Preston and learned even more about the Sabbath. Captain Bates was so excited he could hardly wait to get back to his home and tell his friends and neighbours about his latest truth that he had learned. He was convinced now from the Bible that the seventh day was still the true Bible Sabbath, the day God set apart at creation, and that God had never changed it. As Captain Bates arrived back in his hometown, New Bedford, Massachusetts, he started across a bridge and met his old friend Mr. Hall. "Captain Bates, what's the news?" he called out as he saw Captain Bates hurrying along. "The news is that the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord," called Captain Bates as he slowed down to greet his friend. "Well," said Mr. Hall, "I will go home and study my Bible, and I will see about that." And he did. And the next time they met, Mr. Hall and his wife were both keeping the Sabbath. Come and join us next time to hear about spreading the Sabbath truth.